name's Sid Henderson. I'm a leisure class instructor here at Parks and Recreation, Randolph. And I'm going to show you guys today how to sculpt a little miniature octopus on a bead for jewelry. So first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making 8 twisted stringers, which will be our tentacles. And then I'm going to dot stack a bead that will then be sculpted into an octopus head. And then I'm going to weld the head onto the bead I've already made, and then I'm going to weld the tentacles onto the octopus head and attach them to the bead so that they don't shatter or something. My eyeglasses, which are titanium safety glasses, they will get rid of soda flare and light and protect my eyes from cataracts. Second, I've got a little bowl of water here to put molten globs of glass that are like garbage that I don't want to handle anymore. I've got a big, thick, clear rod for the head. I've got 8 punties here for each tentacle, and then plus 2 more for the head for when I want to switch things around. You can never have too many of these on hand, just to be safe. And then I have the colors I want to use. I've got a lavender stringer here. I've got a black, like a nice thick solid black, and I have a turquoise. So, first thing you want to do is remember the acronym POOP, which stands for propane oxygen for when you turn it on, and then oxygen propane for when you turn it off. If you remember that, you will never screw it up. You always want to turn the propane on first, and you always want to turn off the propane last. All right. So I've got a lighter here, we're going to light up. And what we want is sort of a gentle, fluffy flame like this, because we're gonna put color onto this black thing, melt it in, and then stretch it out into a thick tentacle. So first thing I'm going to do is heat this up really nice. And I'm going to keep the thinner piece of glass in the background because that's going to heat up a lot quicker. And I'm just heating up the rod until it starts to glow, and then I'm going to put it back here, let it cool off. That's just so I know that it's hot enough for the purple glass to adhere. And then we're going to apply, there we go, a stripe down the side like that. And the trick is you want to keep the black glass hot but not molten. You just want the purple stringer to be molten. And you want to try to get an equal length of purple for each stripe. So I'm going to just add on to this a little bit. There we go. Next thing I'm going to do is pull out one of my clear punties here, and I'm going to keep this in the back so that it's hot. I'm going to keep turning that black rod around until the stringers have melted and fused into the black completely. So it should look really smooth. This is totally an ambidextrous kind of thing. You gotta use both hands, but I use my dominant hand, like my right hand, for doing the colored end, because that's the thing that requires more care, and I'll use my left hand for puntying, because that doesn't require as much care. Now ordinarily, if you want to make like a nice stringer, like a nice thin stringer for bead decorating in soft glass or something, you're going to want to pull at a certain hardness in order to make a nice thin stringer. But we're making tentacles here. We don't want to really make something really skinny because that would be very fragile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat this up until it's nice and liquid. There we go. And then I'm going to touch the tip to it And then I'm going to pull back very slowly and keep twisting. And that'll make a striped tentacle. You can just melt that off here. Melt that off into a nice tip. And that stresses the glass a little bit, so I'm going to anneal it by just passing it through the fire, letting it heat up. When that's done, I'm going to stick this punty and tentacle into the kiln to anneal. Just like that. All right, that's pretty good. Okay, so after we made the tentacles, now we're going to switch over to making the head. Now the head's just going to be a bead at the moment that we're going to do something called dot stacking with. And so dot stacking is actually really fun. Basically, you're going to take a rod, you're going to melt it, heat it up nice and slow. We're going to melt a bead onto this. So I'm going to give it a little more heat now so that it turns into a nice glob. There we go. Take this for a spin on my graphite pad there, just to make it more of a cone shape. And now we're going to encase this with black as our base layer. I'm going to heat this up. I've got some black glass right here. I heat that up too. And I heat this up closer because I want this to be more molten than the clear glass that I'm stacking it on. And then I'm just going to, there we go, push down and give it a nice, nice coating of black. Dot stacking is normally done with a hollow tube and a bubble. Like, it's a little bit of a different process. But you can do something similar if you even on a solid glass. There we go. All right, so now it's coated in black, and I'm just going to heat it all up and melt it together so it's nice and smooth. I'm twisting it into a cone just to smooth it out, see? Make all the ridges more even. And then if you have any missing holes that you need to fill in just to sort of smooth it out, you can just touch them up. There we go. So now you have a black bead on the tip of a piece of clear. You could just make this out of solid black glass, but that would be much, much more expensive. So it's much better to just use clear as a coating. Or, yeah, coat a piece of clear in black. Go. So now I'm melting that point into a nice rounded glob of glass. I'm going to let it cool a little bit out here. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create dot stacking. So what you do is you just take a color that's a little different, in this case purple, and what I'm going to do is use a slightly reducing flame with this purple glass because it'll make it stay more opaque. I want it to show up against the black background. So I'm just heating it up. And then I'll make a little dot, just like that. Looks like a chocolate chip now. But the more you heat it, the less it'll look like a chocolate chip. It'll sort of smooth into like a round droplet, which I'll show you in just a second. And I like doing an alternating pattern where everything kind of forms diamond shapes. Doesn't have to be perfect though. All right, there we go. So I'm going to turn up the heat, but I'm going to keep it far away because the weird thing about these opaque colors is that they will kind of bubble if you put them too close. So what we're trying to do is just keep it far away and keep rotating it so that everything melts into a glob. And you can see the little chocolate chip points are starting to round off now. Sort of become more like balls. There we go. Now it's starting to kind of look like, I don't know, pollen or something. So at this point, we can let that cool down a little bit. And keep the heat up. And now I'm going to melt a teal piece of glass. And I'm going to touch molten glass onto the tips of the purple, just like that. And so what this does is it will actually make a perfectly round green dot inside of the lavender colored one. See, it's kind of pretty because you get like a ring shape with another color on the inside. And with people who do dot stacking that are much better than me, they'll use like 4 or 5 different colors of glass and do many layers, and you get these really interesting sort of like ring patterns that build up on the glass. So that's the sort of the appeal for dot stacking. I'm going to turn the heat back up, and I'm going to melt those points, and as they melt, they're going to round off again, just like before. See, they just rounded off into perfect dots. It was thinner, so they did it really quickly. And now we're just going to melt everything together until the lavender and teal glasses fall into the black. I mean, if you wanted to, like if you were doing more of an abstract piece or a bead, you could stop early and this would make like a really interesting sort of like textured sphere that you could do. It's got like these weird little fingers coming out of the sides. I kind of like that. Maybe one day I'll make something with this bizarre lumpy texture. I mean, technically it's an octopus, so it should be kind of lumpy, right? And as tempting as it might be, you shouldn't really push on these dots if you see them being kind of, if they're sticking out farther than they should be, because there's always this chance that the surface will deform and you'll get something ugly instead, like a smashed dot. But yeah, see, it's pretty round now. It's a pretty good melt. You want to keep turning this glass. You don't want to pause for a second, because the clear underneath the colored glass is also becoming molten now. So you want to just keep turning it until it's melted flat. And then when you're done, you pull away slowly and let it cool down, but you still want to keep turning it while it's liquid. Otherwise you're going to have this like bead topple over on your thing and it might stick to the side, or it might be a little bit dysfunctional. Alright, so it's pretty much done now, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. Let it cool down. I'm going to keep it in slight reduction. See how it's feathery rather than sharp? And that's going to keep that lavender opaque so we can see it, because if it turns translucent, it's not going to be easy to see on the black background. So I'm going to bring it away from the fire, let it cool down a little bit. Now I'm going to take punty number 9. It's a good thing we got all those punties ready, right? And I'm going to melt it. You can kind of see now it's already starting to form these pretty little ring shapes. Now, we've got black wrapped around the clear. So what we're going to try to do is heat up the clear. I'm going to punty now. So that's a cold punty. See how it's not glowing, but the clear glass is. So it's kind of a weaker bond, but the nice thing about it is you can hit it and it'll break off cleanly, in theory. It takes a lot of practice. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to heat up the bead and then try to stretch it so that we get a black bead with rings on it. And if it's a little bit stretched out, that's okay too. I'm kind of pulling it away and yanking on it. There we go. So that got rid of that big blob of glass, and now we're left with a nice little bead that we can sculpt into the head. And one of the ways we can take care of some of this excess clear is by taking a pair of pliers. I prefer this one because it's like a scissors. I can just grab onto it. And we're just going to heat up that little chocolate chip of clear and grab onto it and then just yank on it. There we go. So that gets rid of a lot of it. Just chuck it into the clear, or just chuck it into your cool water. The rest of it, we'll just give it a coating of black to finish it off. And because we cold puntied, that other side of the bead, we don't want to pull on this too hard, so we want to make sure the glass is nice and liquidy when we give it a coating. I'll just melt that down and just do some patching here and there. You can also, while you're melting it down, you can also take a tungsten pick and just melt that big thick glob of black and just pull it, stretch it down over the clear to cover it up. So you've got some of this extra glass here, you may as well make good use of it. And I have to fuse it together, and that requires a bit of ambidexterity. So first thing we're going to do is heat this up as much as possible so that it stays nice and hot for us while we're fetching the bead out of the kiln. The second thing is we have to get the bead out of the kiln and punty it up so that it's safe to handle. There we go, alley-oop. Now we need to punty it up. Now it's very dangerous to heat a piece of glass that you formerly worked on. It can explode easily. So what we're going to do is heat this up with a reducing flame. And the reducing flame will actually prevent it from, there we go. So I just made another cold seal on the neck part, so that's the easiest part to manipulate later. I'm going to let it dangle. And basically the point of this is to heat it up. It's going to get covered in soot too, but it's basically supposed to heat it up beyond like the annealing point. It's supposed to heat it up beyond the annealing point, which is what the kiln is set to, as gently as possible so that there won't be any shattering. And it's weird, like if you look at people who make functional glass, they will do this a lot to prevent their wares from breaking. Give it a little bit more oxygen. See how it's already turning red? So the nice thing about this is we're doing that, and then the more oxygen we give it, the more the carbon is going to burn off until we have no, until the carbon's all gone. So that's already starting to happen. See, the carbon's going away. Bye-bye carbon. And now we have a piece of glass that's not shattered and hot enough to work with. So, while I've got that under the fire, I'm going to keep moving that around, and then I've got this guy on the other end, and I'm going to keep moving that around. Now we're going to just bring them close together, and heat them up really good until they're both really nice and molten, and I can make a good bond. And I'm going to stick it on, just like that. Yeah, if I heat this side up really nice and good, got a graphite tool here that I can use to sort of deform the shape a little bit. We don't want to neglect that big glob of glass either. We want to keep holding that out every once in a while and heating that back up, because if we neglect it too much, it might shatter. Doing so, I'm shaping it more and more into an octopus head. I could even heat this up really good. And if I do this enough, it'll start to sort of stretch into an oblong shape, which is also kind of what we want too. Just going to heat the glass pendant up really good, real fast. Alright, here we go. And now I'm going to make the eye stalks by just grabbing and pinching the head. There we go. Heat the other side. So it's nice and molten. Now we got 2 octopus eyes. Alright, so I'm going to heat this up really well. And every time we add a tentacle, we want to heat it back up again to heat that big glass bead back up again to make sure it doesn't shatter on us. Remember to heat the head. Remember to heat the bead. Any thick part, because that's going to get, if it gets pissed off, it's going to crack. Alright, now with that done, the last thing we need to do is just anneal the whole thing really good. So I'm gonna turn the flame up. I'm just gonna heat just gonna spin it around in front of this, like, you know, the hotter, or no, sorry, I'm gonna spin it around in front of the, like, outer fire, you know, for a little bit of time, just to heat everything up, get it nice and warm, including the big bead in the center, which I'm particularly worried about because it's the largest mass, but also the head. If anything is likely to crack, it's either going to be the big glass bead that the octopus is sitting on, or the head. So I want to make sure everything's sort of all heated up in the same temperature before I call it quits. Just in case someone wants to work out at the gym so they can wear this without getting a pulled muscle in their neck, because this is a big slugger, we still want to anneal the tentacles to the glass that they're attached to really well to make sure that they are really fused and won't chip off. Alright, so now that that's done, I'm going to cut back on the fire. It's still going to be gentle, but it's going to be on a lower setting. Let everything cool down at the same rate. Everything's got to cross the finish line at about the same time. So, this was a demo on how to make an octopus attached to a bead. My name is Sid Henderson. I'm a leisure class instructor at Parks and Recreation at Randolph Park. And the few last notes that I want to say are, it's when you're finishing up your projects, especially if it's a large piece of glass like the one I worked with today, be sure to give it a long annealing bath in the fire before you stick it in the kiln to anneal it the rest of the way. This was made out of boro glass, so it's less temperamental than soft glass, but still large pieces will shatter on you even if you don't treat them carefully as they're going down. I owe a big thanks to Kathy Frody, who taught me how to do a lot of things, including stringers and how to make loop bales, which I then carried over into how to make tentacles. And be sure to check out our glass classes for torch making. They're a lot of fun, and the price is great.